The Frozen Flame. The Curse of Valyria and the Secret Rise of the Targaryens. They say dragons were the glory of Valyria, the blazing furnace where power and magic met in their purest and most terrifying form. A civilization that rose upon the ashes of others, driven by the fire of winged beasts and the audacity of men who dared to control them. But glory itself, in its senseless arrogance and limitless quest for more, ignited its own ruin, consuming itself in a cataclysm of biblical proportions that echoes to this day in the nightmares of the few who dare whisper its name. And what if the truth behind the doom is more complex, more chilling, more intentional than the official history, the one the Meisters insist on recording, tells us? Do you know what really caused the doom, that apocalyptic event that swept an entire empire from the face of the world, leaving behind only a landscape of poisonous vapor and cursed ruins? And even more intriguing, how did a single family, obscure and underestimated by their peers, dare to defy fate, fleeing hell before it materialized to eventually ascend and reign over Westeros, a continent that barely knew of their existence? In this first and perhaps most crucial whisper of Whispers of Westeros, we're going to dive into the depths of a forgotten past. A past that, though remote, still casts its cold and dense shadow over the present of King's Landing and the lives we know so well, shaping dynasties and determining the fate of peoples. We will unravel the history of Valyria, not just as a realm of dragons and sorcerers, but as a cauldron of unbridled ambition, uncontrolled magic, and an arrogance that defied the very gods, or the primordial forces of the world. And, more importantly, we will reveal how House Targaryen, far from being mere lucky escapees by the skin of their teeth, were guided by a prophetic vision, a secret passed down through generations that allowed them to escape the imminent hell, and centuries later forge a new empire upon bones and legends. Valyria. The very name echoes not only with power and mystery, but also with the agony of an abrupt end. Imagine for a moment a city that was not just great, but legendary. A colossal metropolis, built upon volcanic rock and adorned with architecture so grand it defied gravity and the logic of engineering. Its buildings, its walls, its imposing bridges, all constructed with a material called dragonstone, molded with spells and fire, as smooth and dark as polished obsidian. They say its roads were smooth and black, like polished glass, where not even a single tuft of grass dared to grow. Hot water from the volcanic depths flowed through its streets in channels of marble and gold, heating homes and supplying fountains. It was an empire of incalculable vastness, stretching across much of Essos, dominating kingdoms, cities, and even the wild and mysterious eastern lands, with colonies reaching as far as the Isle of Noth in the Summer Sea. The Dragon Lords, the so-called Dragons of Valyria, were not kings in the common sense that Westeros would later know. They were the 40 most powerful and ancient families who governed in council, their lives and destinies inextricably intertwined with those of their winged beasts. Their robes were of fine silk, their hair silver, their eyes violet or indigo, marks of a blood purity they guarded jealously, aware of their uniqueness and their ability to control dragons. Their domain stretched from the smoking sea, a cursed body of water where dragons were born and tamed by generations of dragon lords, to the western colonies, which included everything from prosperous Pentos to the distant and rocky Dragonstone. To them, the rest of the world was barbaric, uncultured, inferior. Magic was the foundation of their society. They not only mastered dragons, flying over their domains with blazing arrogance, but whisper the darkest texts, could give life to horrifying chimeras, manipulate flesh and bone with arcane spells, and shape the landscape with an art that bordered on the divine. The 14 Flames, the chain of volcanoes that serpentined through Valyria and the smoking sea, were not just impressive geographical features. They were the source of their power, the furnace of their prosperity, the cradle of their dragons, and the origin of their most precious metals, like the legendary Valyrian steel, whose forging art, imbued with magic, was completely lost with the Doom. The Valyrians, in their overwhelming hubris, believed themselves invincible, untouchable, the supreme race, destined to rule forever, immune to any catastrophe that might befall common mortals. They used and abused thousands, perhaps millions of slaves, forcing them to excavate the volcanic treasures from the depths of the 14 flames, ignoring the tremors and warnings of the very ground beneath their feet, blinded by greed and presumption. But all unbridled glory has its price, and all arrogance, its cataclysmic fall, the doom. No word in all the lore of Westeros is as laden with horror, mystery, and the shadow of annihilation as this one. On a single fateful day, which the Valyrian calendar marked as the 14th day of the 8th month, a catastrophe of truly apocalyptic proportions swept Valyria from the map, transforming their vibrant empire into a smoking nightmare. The 14 flames, which had once been their servants, their pillars of power, erupted simultaneously with unspeakable fury. The ground opened in abyssal chasms that swallowed entire cities. Rivers of molten lava, hotter and swifter than any current, flooded valleys and devoured fortresses. The air filled with suffocating ash, scalding vapor, and acidic smoke that corroded everything in its path. The smoking sea itself, once a cradle of dragons, boiled and bubbled with infernal intensity, spewing vapor and ash that darkened the sky for an entire year, transforming day into a perpetual yellowed twilight. Millions died. Dragons, their masters, sorcerers, slaves, commoners, all were incinerated, drowned, suffocated, or crushed in an instant, with no chance of escape. The Valyrian Empire, which had proudly sustained itself for 5,000 years, crumbled in a matter of hours, leaving behind only a desert of persistent smoke, melted rock, sunken islands, and terrifying legends that not even the bravest sailors dared revisit. The heart of the world had stopped beating, and the pulse of magic had been abruptly interrupted. The exact cause of the doom remains an impenetrable mystery, shrouded in ash and speculation that fascinates and terrifies the few scholars who dare to study it. It is here that the whispers become more intriguing, more complex, more laden with dark possibilities. The most accepted theories among the Meisters of Westeros, those who prefer logical and natural explanations, vary. Some claim, with the confidence of those who did not live the horror, that it was a colossal natural disaster, a series of unprecedented volcanic eruptions and earthquakes, perhaps triggered by excessive and reckless exploitation of the 14 flames. They argue that the Valyrians, in their greed, had dug so deep, exploited the Earth's magic so aggressively, that they had ruptured the very crust of the world, causing an inevitable retribution from nature for centuries of abuse and human sacrifice. Others, more inclined to faith, whisper that it was an act of the gods, a divine and just punishment for the overwhelming hubris of the Valyrians, their insatiable quest for power at any cost, their moral depravity, and their disregard for the lives of their slaves, who were treated with a cruelty that shocked even barbaric societies. They would have been punished for their impiety and for trying to equal the gods. But there are much darker, deeper, and terrifyingly more convincing theories that circulate among the few who dedicate themselves to studying ancient mysteries, burned scrolls and fragments of forbidden knowledge. What if the doom was not an accident, but an intentional act of magic, an orchestrated cosmic imbalance? Some ancient texts and fragmented chronicles suggest that the very uncontrolled and irresponsible use of magic by the Valyrians, especially blood magic linked to the smoking hearts of volcanoes, may have unbalanced the very fabric of reality. Perhaps they had gone too far, exploring the depths of the earth and sources of power that should not be touched, tearing the veil between worlds and invoking forces they could not control. Magic, in its primordial essence, seeks balance. And the Valyrians, in their lust for power, were masters at unbalancing it in favor of their own dominion. Some spoke of lost spells or binding magics that sustained Valyria itself, keeping the 14 flames under control. And these spells, perhaps overloaded or sabotaged, would have failed spectacularly, releasing the imprisoned fury. Even more disturbing is the whisper of a conspiracy, a deliberate act of magical destruction. What if the doom was an orchestrated attack, a retribution from an external force, or from a hidden enemy? Some obscure legends, more common in the eastern lands, point to the mysterious shadow lords of Asshai, dark sorcerers who, they say, can walk between shadows and weave spells of annihilation that rival Valyrian power. Or perhaps to even older and darker forces, primordial entities that dwelt in the depths of mountains or in the shadows of the world, envious of Valyrian power, or more likely, fearful of their unbridled expansion, which threatened the delicate cosmic balance of the universe. The Shadowlands of Asshai are known for their arcane magic, for their sorcerers who can walk between shadows and invoke black flames. Would it be possible that they, or some other forgotten entity from the dawn of time, had invoked a curse of such magnitude, a magical plague aimed at obliterating the empire that threatened the very fabric of reality? The silence that followed the doom, the fact that no other nation dared venture into the ruins for centuries, except for desperate pirates seeking cursed treasures, suggests something more than a mere natural disaster. It suggests a persistent, magical stain, a malignant energy, a trail of horror that still permeates the smoking lands and makes hair stand on end. In the midst of this imminent cataclysm, while the rest of the Valyrian Empire lived in their bubble of invincibility, a whisper was heard, not the roar of the earth opening, but the soft yet insistent voice of a prophecy. 112 years before the Doom, a period that shows the patience and strange nature of time for the Targaryens, at the height of Valyrian power, a young girl named Daenerys Targaryen, known to history as Daenerys the Dreamer, had a vision. She did not just dream, she saw Valyria's destruction in vivid and terrifying detail. She saw the infernal flames, the ground opening in blazing abysses, hell swallowing the city and its inhabitants. She saw the smoke, the vapor, the darkness that would cover the sun. She felt the heat, the terror, the inevitability. She told her father, Rhaegar Targaryen, a dragon lord who, to the other 40 lords, was just a minor and less important member of the council, a family of little influence, wealth, and prestige compared to the Valyrian giants like the Velaryons or the Celtigars, who possessed more gold and lands. Rhaegar, a man who possessed unwavering faith in his daughter's prophetic sensitivity, did the unthinkable, an act that to other Valyrians was the pinnacle of cowardice and madness. Against the scorn, mockery, and open derision of the other dragon lords, he sold his properties in Valyria, his houses, his slaves, his domains in Valyrian lands, and, with cold determination, carried his entire family, including his wife Valyna, his son Gaemon, and his prophetic daughter Daenerys, to the distant and rocky island of Dragonstone. Dragonstone was a volcanic fortress, an outpost of Valyria in the Narrow Sea, about 250 leagues from Westeros, an island the Targaryens had controlled for 2 centuries. They took with them their 5 dragons, Balerion, Rhaegar, Meraxes, and 2 others whose names were lost to time, but who died on Dragonstone without their blood-generating descendants, their accumulated riches, and most crucial, their secrets and pure bloodline, the key to their power. They were seen as cowards or fools, fleeing from a threat that existed only in a girl's feverish dreams. The other dragon lords laughed, ignoring the signs from the earth and the whispers of the gods, who, in their right mind, would leave the center of the universe, the glory of Valyria, for a desolate rock at the end of the world, near a continent of barbarians. But laughter turned to ash and scorn to horror when the doom came, in all its destructive splendor. Rhaegar Targaryen, the fool who became the exile, had become the savior of his lineage. The Targaryens, with their remaining dragons, were the only dragon lords who survived the cataclysm. They were the last remnants of Valyrian glory, the guardians of a legacy thought lost forever, a seed of ancient magic adrift in the Narrow Sea. Dragonstone, a volcanic and desolate island, became their refuge, their fortress, and their sanctuary. A fortress built for a future they did not yet fully understand, but for which Daenerys the Dreamer may have already had other visions. An island whose dark and pointed rocks, rich in dragon glass, resembled dragon scales, and whose volcanic caves, still warm, were perfect nests for the winged beasts that had saved their family from annihilation. For the next 112 years, a period that extended almost 5 generations, while the rest of the world tried to recover from the shock waves of the Doom, while the free cities rose from the ashes of the Valyrian Empire, fighting. For territory and power, the Targaryens remained on Dragonstone. They were a small family, isolated, with their few dragons and the knowledge of a lost age, guarded like a treasure. They did not try to reclaim Valyria, whose soil still boiled and emitted poisonous vapors. They did not even meddle in the wars of Essos, which consumed the free cities in battles for territory and influence. They simply waited. They married between brothers and sisters to maintain the purity of their dragon blood, a tradition that, though shocking and seen as incest by the inhabitants of Westeros, was common in Valyria to maintain the bloodline and powers of dominion over dragons. This ensured the perpetuation of their Valyrian characteristics: silver gold hair, violet eyes, and an innate affinity with fire and dragons. But what made them wait so long on that remote and shadowy island? Life on Dragonstone was not the glory of Valyria. It was an existence of caution, preservation, survival. Their dragons, once part of a legion, were now the last of their kind, and the risk of losing them, whether through disease, old age, or accidents, was constant. Each egg that hatched was a celebration, each new dragon a new hope. They were not an empire, but a family, and their few ties with the outside world were limited to sporadic trade with the nearest free cities, like Pentos and Myr, and the construction of their fortress, an imposing landmark of their presence. What prevented them from acting? Why did the power of dragons remain inert for more than a century, while Westeros, the neighboring continent, was divided into 7 rival kingdoms, constantly at war, ripe for conquest? Legends speak of a fragmented realm, where petty kings fought for every inch of land. The Storm King, the King of the Reach, the Kings of the Rock, the Kings in the North, the Kings of the Vale, the Princes of Dorne, the Kings of the Isles and Rivers, all in perpetual conflict, consuming themselves in small wars that weakened the continent, an easy target for Targaryen dragons. The answer, my dear listeners, may lie in an even deeper whisper, a secret that is not widely known even among the most respected Meisters: the prophecy. Beyond Daenerys' vision of the Doom, some secret scholars and ancient Valyrian texts preserved by the Targaryens suggest that House Targaryen possessed other prophecies, visions that spoke of a threat that would come from the icy lands of the far north, an ancestral darkness that would swallow the world if not stopped, a threat that could only be fought by a king with dragons, a king who, first of all, would have to unite Westeros under a single banner, creating a kingdom strong enough to face what was to come. This prophecy, known as the Song of Ice and Fire, which many believe to be the true driving force behind Aegon the Conqueror's actions, was not about conquering for the sake of conquering, not about mere greed or thirst for power. It was about preparing the world, uniting men for a much greater war, an existential war against the darkness that had haunted the long night millennia ago and threatened to return. The story of Aegon and his sisters, Visenya and Rhaenys, is generally told as a saga of ambition, conquest, and overwhelming power. They saw Westeros fragmented, in constant conflict and therefore weak, an easy target for their remaining dragons and superior military strategy. But what if Aegon the Conqueror acted not just out of pure power, but out of a sense of duty forged by a terrible vision? What if he was not just an ambitious tyrant and military genius, but a prophet, a warrior destined to unite the realm to face a future threat that transcended human borders and politics? This is the true icy flame, the central paradox of Targaryen ascension, the glory of their dragons, born from the fire and destruction of their ancient house, but driven by the premonitory fear of a winter that could freeze the very world, of an enemy that could not be fought by divided realms. The Targaryens were not just the lucky survivors of the Doom, they were the guardians of a secret, the heirs of a prophecy that led them to Westeros with a greater purpose. The very choice of Westeros was not random, a mere whim of Aegon. It was a fertile land with vast resources and, crucially, a strategic position that would make it an ideal fortress against any threat coming from the north. And more crucially, it was a It was a land that, despite its division into warring kingdoms, was ripe for unification. A perfect chessboard for the strategic skills and military superiority of a Targaryen with dragons. They waited, accumulated their power on Dragonstone, allowed their dragons to grow and multiply. And then, when prophetic moment and political opportunity aligned, they acted with a ferocity and vision that no one in Westeros had ever seen. Essos, a Targaryen king who ruled centuries after Aegon, was known for his almost obsessive passion for prophecies and for surrounding himself with scholars who studied ancient and lost Valyrian texts, seeking whispers from the past that could predict the future. This suggests that House Targaryen always had this inclination toward mysticism and prophecies, a trait inherited from Valyria and perhaps reinforced by Daenerys' vision and the cataclysm she predicted. What else did they know that drove them to rule Westeros and maintain their pure blood through endogamous marriages? What other prophetic secrets were passed from generation to generation, whispered from king to heir, from maester to prince, to the last of the Targaryens, influencing their actions and destinies in ways the world never suspected? Thus, the rise of the Targaryens in Westeros was not mere chance, a stroke of luck, or a simple manifestation of ambition. It was an act of survival, yes, but also of unwavering faith in a dark vision of the future, a determination to prepare for what was to come. They were the last vestiges of a lost glory, but also the first to understand that the true threat to Westeros would not come from a neighboring army or land disputes, but from an ancestral and terrifying enemy waiting in the shadows beyond the wall, a threat that could freeze the very soul of the world and extinguish all life. The Targaryens, the family that survived the hell of Valyria, brought with them not only dragons and their blood of fire, but a legacy of forbidden knowledge and a prophetic burden. Their rise in Westeros was not just about conquering, it was about preparing. Preparing the realm for a war yet to come, a war that, in one way or another, was always the true purpose of their reign, a purpose they may have forgotten over the generations, but which, at its core, always drove them. If this whisper has captivated you, and you wish to unravel more of Westeros' dark secrets, don't hesitate. Subscribe to the Whispers of Westeros channel. Leave your like to show that Valyria's flames still burn within you, and share this video with other seekers of legends who yearn for more than superficial history can offer. Embrace the darkness, and the truth will be revealed. Next, we will unravel the mystery of the king who united 7 kingdoms under a dragon's wing. Aegon, the Conqueror. Prepare to know the truth behind his brutal conquests, his most guarded secrets, and the dark prophecy that led him to forge the Iron Throne with fire and blood. What were the sacrifices? What were the pacts? Are you ready for the next Whispers of Westeros?